Once upon a time, in Cupertino, California, a technology company was founded by 3 individuals. But nobody ever imagined that one day it would become the tech giant that we all know today, Apple. But how did Apple become such a great tech company? And why did they become a tech company? Why did Steve Jobs name the company Apple? Does Apple have twice the amount of money than the US Treasury? Was the company's first logo a drawing of a Sir Isaac Newton? Was Apple the first to make a digital camera? It's time for me to answer all these questions and more, since this is ASMR. Aaron, back at it again with another daily video to help you relax. So lay back and enjoy the ride. I hope this read helps you get you through your day, or even better, I hope this video helps you gently fall asleep. I can't wait to get started. This is the tale of Apple.
Apple Inc. was incorporated by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak in 1976. However, it took around a year's time for the founders of Apple Inc. to get it registered as a company in the United States. Prior to January 1977, Apple Inc. was an idea started at random, but the commercial effort to secure this idea was made on January 3, 1977. The place where this wonderful idea was registered was Cupertino, California. It wasn't the case that both these Steves met once and created the existing Apple company in a few meetings. Rather, they were friends. They met in 1971 through a mutual friend. With this mutual friend in between, both the Steves started using technology to create income for themselves. It was an informal arrangement where they experimented with making boxes that could allow people to conduct long-distance calls without involving any money. With the initial success of this idea, they both realized their potential in working on technology for the purpose of earning. It was back then when the idea of creating and selling computers was floated between Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. There is a completely mind-blowing story involved with this initiation of Apple Company. It is one of the milestones that the history of Apple would always point towards. Getting interested in it? Let's continue to the next section. Both Steves had the idea about the creation of computers, but they could not commercialize, especially at a large scale, without any orders or investment. So one of the first orders that Steve Jobs managed to get was from a local computer store. The terms of this order are particularly interesting. There was no sample available with Steve Jobs to show the history of Apple Inc. or the product that he or his team could make. But he entered in an arrangement where a working computer was acceptable by the management of the local store. The condition was that if Steve Jobs and his team really managed to relate something workable, the local store would buy 50 more pieces from them at a rate of $500 each. This was a huge amount at that time, so the deal was finalized. But now the question was where they would get the spare parts for making the machines. In order to resolve this problem, Steve Jobs went to Kramer Electronics. For them, relying on a random individual was not possible. But when he showed his order slip and asked to get the spare parts on a 30-day credit term, the credit manager agreed, and he was able to procure all the necessary parts that were required for the initial creation of the computer. This was the initiation of the soon-to-be billionaire company. The best part of this setting was the strategy used by the partners to finance their computers. They did not have to give away any of the shares or stock holdings to anyone, but still managed to get the necessary financing. The initial computers that were created by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak were simple. Only a few important features were the part of this system, but still, they managed to grab the attention of the users. Some of these features include a TV display system, the existence of bootstrap code on ROM, and the presence of a cassette interface. All the features meant lower design components used in the computer with the existence of better speed and performance, as compared to a number of other devices available in the market. This computer was termed as Apple I, and is the initial version of the computers that have been created under the Apple brand name. Despite getting the initial 50 orders from Byte Store, it wasn't possible for both the partners to create their own vicinity or factory line where they could manufacture the computers. So one of the things that they did was borrowing the space from mutual friends and selling a number of electronic and technology goods at varied rates. However, this was not a feasible model for the company to flourish. This is why Steve's tried to get loans from the bank for this purpose. Neither the banks nor the individual lenders were willing to provide funds for the project that no one was willing to use. You'll have to be in the shoes of the people of the 70s decade to relate to this point. There was no scope of using computers at a personal level at this time. Even businesses weren't used to having computers. The conglomerates or the large organizations were the legitimate users of the computers. So investing in the creation of computers seemed absurd to the users. Initially, Ronald Wayne also became the partner of the company. It was the time when both the Steves, Wayne and Mike Mark Kula, were able to find a bank loan and signed it together. They were the initial days of the company, and its ups and downs in the company were part of the routine. However, Wayne did not want to be part of the company with such high risks, and left the business at quite an early stage. Such a setting left both the Steves as the prominent and active partners of the venture. Once the formal company was established, and it had enough money to manage the computers in a better way, Wayne wanted to introduce new features to the computers. These computers were named as Apple II. Most of the design features that Apple I had were due to the limited resources available with the owner. As soon as the resources issues were settled, Wayne experimented with the inclusion of new features that could offer better functionality. This was the time when the company made direct contact with the public. West Coast Computer Fair was chosen for this purpose, which was a 2-day fair for highlighting the different types of computers. The fair came with huge success for the company because this was the place where a Japanese chemist got impressed with the design and features of Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. He was the first authorized dealer of Apple II in Japan. The features and history of Apple II are not much different from Apple I. There were slight modifications and improvements in the existing design. These changes made the computer a better version. Apart from the improved TV display, the computer could store the display for some time in memory. Moreover, graphics improved the overall visuals of the computers. Later, colors were also introduced in the same version to make it a lot better than the last version of the computers that the company had produced. The Apple II released in 1977 had great input from a designer known as Jerry Manock. He managed to create a compact form that was far easier to set up than the previous version. At this stage, Apple II was being recognized for the efforts that were being made in the industry. In fact, the release of Apple II has an important place in the history of Apple, as Apple II is known to be a key instigator in creating the home demand for the computers. Imagine, if Apple II hadn't been there to ease up the settings and usage process, we would have got the computers for our daily usage after waiting a lot more. So Apple actually deserves a bit of appreciation on this end too. This version of Apple computers was released in 1980. It was by far the most sophisticated version, and was intended for the business users. One of the design innovations that the managers and the creators of Apple III introduced was the removal of the cooling fan from the hardware components. The main idea was that the Apple computer would dissipate the amount of heat generated through the chassis. But this did not work as planned. The removal of the fan and no proper working of chassis for the removal of extra heat resulted in the disintegration of the chips from the motherboard. There was a definite resentment in the people who were using this version of Apple computers. The people who were asking for the solutions to fix the problem were asked to lift up the computer 6 inches and then leave it. The purpose of such a rash treatment was to allow the integrated circuits to get back to the original position. If you're finding such a solution funny, it actually was. You wouldn't have seen it coming from one of the best companies in the IT sector today. The history of Apple contains a few such incidents that could actually provide you with the struggling stories that Apple had to face in order to reach the current level. We are not going to get in detail for every version of Apple computers that were previously produced. The new technology and the features were constantly included in the computers to create a good brand reputation in the market. The brand name that Apple created for itself in the initial days helped in the creation of the competitive advantage, making the company stand out from other companies existing at that time. As we mentioned in the above section, that the third series of Apple computers had the problem, so it would be appropriate to mention Apple IV here. Apple IV came with a solution to the problem that was being faced by the users of Apple III. This new version was released in 1983. Although it was a good measure to manage the problems created with the previous version, with problems made the users skeptical about the company already. One of the milestones in the history of Apple Inc. is its initial public offering, or IPO. The company became available for the public to invest in it in 1980. The IPO was far more successful in comparison to some of the leading brands that existed in the market at that time. One of the examples was Ford's iPod. Apple's IPO generated a huge sum of investment, which triggered a new era in the history of Apple. One of the important things that you would want to know from the first meetings with the shareholders is that Steve Jobs wanted to deliver a great speech about the company and its products, etc. But as there were too many interruptions, he left this idea and started talking about the emotional content. That speech had a great audience, and he became prominent for his public speaking skills at that time too. After the formal iPod, changes with the design of the computer and inclusion of a number of technologies in the creation process of the computer and the computer itself, Apple Inc. became quite prominent in the industry. It was the first time in 1984 when Apple released its first TV commercial. By spending a lot of money for this purpose, Apple Inc. managed to spend $1.5 million to air the commercial in the third quarter of Super Bowl XVIII. Additionally, 1984 did not only mark the history of video commercials, but the magazine advertisements also got a prominent place in the history of Apple. The post-election edition of Newsweek was all booked by Apple. Yes, all of it. It was a huge investment and had an important role in establishing the image of the company at that time. You can surely say that this was the era when Apple started its branding formally, and started taking out the campaigns to generate one in the best possible way. The purpose of going for extreme marketing was the launch of Macintosh. Because of the best commercial aired 2 days earlier to the launch, the new product of the company received a great response from the buyers as well. However, for a particular part of the audience, the new Macintosh was a toy. The reason for such a statement was that there was no back-end interface where users could make changes. It was all about the graphical user interface. This is what created problems for some of the users. Later, with the passage of time and the introduction of new functionalities in the field of technology, Macintosh has managed to grab the attention of a great number of users. It has got quite prominent in the market and has become part of the lives of a number of individuals. In the growth phase of a company, it has to face a number of challenges. One of the most prominent ones is to manage growth. The increasing number of individuals associated with the business can have different visions, and that creates a conflict in governing the company. It was being faced by Apple in 1985. President Steve Jobs wanted to work on Macintosh and provide it as the solution to the business, whereas the aim of CEO Scully had an inclination towards the Apple II generation computers. Although initially it was agreed that the company would go with the Macintosh division, when at the end it failed, it improved the position of Scully in the company. Jobs had no influence left in the company, so he decided to set part his ways from the company. Once Jobs left, he started investing in other technological companies. Many of those companies have the importance in terms of existence, but none of them made it to commercial success. When the original founder of the company left Apple Inc., Sculley was the first boss that the company had. In the consequent year of his leadership, the company declared a dividend that showed the maintenance of the high standard. In the next year, the stock was split by the ratio 2-to-1. Till 1989, 5 different acquisitions were made by Apple Inc., thus adding to the success of the company. Moreover, the Macintosh and Apple II range both were continued under the leadership of Sculley in order to enhance the profit. However, the newer versions and features were another thing that the company had to incorporate in the business line. This is why new versions of the existing computer ranges became a part of the company. Even the Mac, which was performing less than Apple II range of computers, but still establishing itself as a special division in the company. Premium and latest versions of this range of computer were also being introduced in the market, targeting the business users. According to Mac Addict magazine, the period of 1989 to 1991 was considered as the first golden age of the Macintosh range of computers. Internet, which was one of the newer products at that time, had a place for Apple, or you can say that Apple capitalized the opportunity and became one of the 100 companies to buy the .com extension domain. For most of you, it won't come with a surprise if we say that the existing apple.com domain is about 32 years old. The study of the history of Apple shows that, like most of the companies, Apple has faced the upstream and downstream, as in the entire journey as well. By 1996, the great reputation that the company was building up over time seemed to halt. There were no new products in the market. Moreover, the existing products were facing immense competition from other companies existing in the market. It seemed difficult that with the same situation, Apple computers would be able to secure their position in the industry for the long run. But that was not the end of the company. In 1977, Steve Jobs came back to Apple Inc. as an interim CEO. On his return, he started restructuring the company. And this restructuring was on a massive level. When he rejoined Apple, he made significant changes to the structure of the company. Moreover, changes in the governance were also made. This helped in generating the success, which is extending till today. The creation of Apple Store, new and latest versions of the personal gadgets, partnership with Microsoft, all of these ventures were part of the leadership of Steve Jobs. He actually brought back the company from its down phase to the success again. The history of Apple was transformed once again. In August 2011, he resigned from the position of CEO because of his health condition. Later, in October, he died dealing with pancreatic cancer. This version of Apple Company is what most of you would have often read about. From the introduction of Apple Watches and sophisticated technology and personal gadgets, this era of Apple and its products brought real glory to the company. The extended version of this era is what we are seeing even today. The name Apple came from founder Steve Jobs' like of the fruit. Mystery surrounded the reason for the name Apple, but in truth, it was just the fruit that Jobs liked, and named the company after that. Apple is so successful it has twice the amount of money than the U.S. Treasury. Apple's first company logo featured a drawing of the father of physics, Sir Isaac Newton. Apple was the first to make a digital color camera. And so ends the tale of the tech giant Apple, that continues to offer new technology so that we can have a better life.